So, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, experts, dear guests, welcome to the International Conference Real Life and Real Economics that brings together scientists and researchers from more than 7 disciplines, practicing businessmen, economists, journalists, as well as specialized experts from different fields. Understanding the fundamentals of the economy can provide answers about the knowledge and skills necessary not only for surviving in the market in unpredictable conditions, but for achieving the well-being of many, a process which is not spontaneous but mastered. I am sincerely honored and pleased to welcome everyone to the third online panel of the International Conference arranged by the European Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. And today we're glad to welcome the reunion of experts in the framework of Real Life and Real Economics Conference discussion. So the key discussion points of the current online session are as follows. The first one, origins of business construction elements, human resources, marketing, etc. And the second one, people and consumer society, the place of the person in consumer society. My name is Iryna Lopatiuk, and I am happy to be a moderator today. And now please let me introduce our speakers right in the way they are given the floor. Dr. Oleg Maltsev, Ukraine, author, criminologist, psychologist, lawyer, investigative journalist, business strategy consultant. He is academician of European Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, founder and director of the Memory Institute, head of Expeditionary Corps. He is an author of numerous books in the areas such as applied history, sociology, depth psychology, philosophy, criminalistics, and criminology. Dr. Maltsev has been conducting field research with the Expeditionary Corps in many countries for more than 6 years to explore the way different nations and rulers attained power throughout the history. He is an editor of several interdisciplinary peer-reviewed journals. Welcome, Dr. Maltsev. Our next guest and speaker is Alan Shapiro, Germany. He is a thinker and essayist known for his work in media theory, transdisciplinary and future design, postmodern philosophy, and science fiction studies. He has published the books Star Trek Technologies of Disappearance, The Technological Herbarium, Software of the Future, and Transdisciplinary Design. He has recently been visiting professor of design at the Koppelman University of the Arts and currently teaches media theory at the University of the Arts, Bremen, and future design research at the University of Applied Sciences and Arts, Lucerne. Since 2011, Shapiro has been keynote speaker at 20 academic or business conferences and art festivals. We are glad that you're together with us today. Our next speaker is Dr. Alexander Sagaidak, the head of Theorem Association. He is a psychologist, Jungian analyst, hypnologist, academician, expert in anthropology and sociology, chairman of the Psychological Philosophical Scientific Society in the UAS. Welcome. Our next speaker is Pavel Pedina, financial expert, businessman, analyst, member of the Young Business Club, financial expert for Eastern Europe, Studio Legale di Giovarzi, Sicily, Italy. And our next dear expert and guest is Professor Jerome Krase, USA, Emeritus Professor, sociologist, Murray Koppelman Professor, School of Humanities and Social Sciences, President of European Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, expert in sociology, gentrification in Brooklyn ethnic groups, Italian-American politics, culture, race, class, urban life, and ethnicity in New York. One of his recent books includes Race, Class, and Gentrification in Brooklyn, A View from the Street. He is a public activist scholar and serves as a consultant to public and private agencies regarding urban community issues, co-editor of Urbanities and editorial board member of Visual Studies and CIDADES. Welcome, dear guests and experts. Let me please deliver just a few words about the reference terms of the panel. Each speaker holds the opportunity to answer 2 questions in 2 rounds. Please limit the extent of your speeches up to 8 or 10 minutes, no longer than 10 minutes, please. To begin with, we shall start the discussion on the very first issue. And I suggest we should start that right away. So the first question is the origins of business construction elements, human resources, marketing, etc. And right now, let me please give the floor to our first speaker, Dr. Oleg Maltsev. You're welcome.
Я уже вчера на панели говорил о том, что я поставил себе задачу в каждой конференции писать книгу. Кто не видел, выглядит она вот таким вот, ну, как бы способом. Называется «Тайна или преступление. Настоящая жизнь и настоящая экономика». То, о чем я буду говорить, это то, что не вошло как бы в книгу.
On yesterday's panel, I have mentioned that for each conference, I'm setting myself a goal to author a separate book, and I've shown you the cover of the recent book, which is titled A Crime or an Enigma. And today, I'm going to be sharing a couple of points that are not included in the book.
То есть, по сути своей, начнем с происхождения бизнес-структуры.
So first of all, let us start with the origin of business structure as it is.
Да, почему мы имеем сегодня вот такие отрасли и почему рынок устроен таким способом, почему компании такие?
So meaning that why the industries look the way they are, why companies look the way they are.
Как вы понимаете, природу надо искать в истории.
And certainly logically one would understand that when it comes to the origin, we should always go back to the history.
И очень многие люди, они не добиваются никаких успехов в бизнесе, не добиваются никаких успехов профессиональных, потому что не понимают природу того, чем они занимаются.
And most of the people on earth, they do not succeed in their business or in their professional activity that they're engaged in, only because they do not have an in-depth understanding of what they are doing.
Как вы понимаете, до меня люди работали в этом направлении.
And certainly there have been people that worked in this direction before me.
И один из моих учителей, как бы, то есть этого человека я лично не знал, это уже мой, как бы, научный руководитель, как бы его ученик, академик Григорий Семенович Попов.
And one of my teachers, academician Grigory Semyonovich Popov, who already passed away.
Да, он как бы открыл в науке как бы такой закон, который как бы гласит о том, что, в общем-то, исторически ничего не поменялось, да, то есть все принимают в будущем некие формы абсурда предыдущего.
And he discovered so-called law that nothing is new in this world, that everything takes just a different shape, more absurd shape of what did exist in the past.
И как вы понимаете, для того, чтобы возник бизнес, нужен рынок, нужны деньги, нужен товарооборот и прочие как бы вещи. И самое главное, нужно это все организовать.
And certainly in order for a business to emerge, one has to have market, there has to be money, circulation of the products, and these all different elements in the market should be organized somehow.
То есть нужно понимать, что когда возникал бизнес, возникала новая жизнь, новая эпоха в Европе и в мире, как бы.
So when a business was originating in Europe, it was about an entire new epoch, a new life.
Кто об этом глубоко не задумывался никогда, ему очень сложно себе представить, как перевернуть мир духовно, сословно и как бы психологически и физически.
And for people who did not give enough deep thought about this emergence of entire new era, new lifestyle, new business in Europe, it's quite hard to understand and even comprehend what allowed people to completely change the entire Europe, be it spiritually, be it in terms of their titles, physically, psychologically, because it was a massive transformation.
То есть очень многие люди считают, что революция 1630 года, как бы буржуазная, это начало бизнеса.
And most of the modern scholars consider that the beginning of the modern business starts with the revolution of 1830s.
На самом деле это уже конец, это подведение итогов. Как бы.
However, in contrast, in fact, it is actually the end. It's like a conclusion of certain series of events.
То есть, по сути, это политический переворот.
In other words, it was about a political overthrow, political turmoil.
То есть, который завершал построение нового мира в Европе.
Which was concluding building of a new world for Europe.
Да, и с этого момента мы считаем, что Европа приобрела тот строй, те формы, те как бы ограничения, те задачи, как бы те законы, которые мы сегодня как бы видим. Ну, она стала такой, как мы сегодня ее себе представляем.
And it is considered that from that time on, the Europe took that form and shape that we perceive today. New tasks, new regulations, new laws, new restrictions, and everything that we actually can see today originated at that time, concluded at that time.
Ну, то есть, по сути своей, как бы дальше Америка, Россия и так далее, то есть, по сути, бизнес-строй как бы заполонил весь мир практически, ну, то есть, подавляющее большинство государств.
And along with that, we have most of the countries that also went through a transformation, like America, Russia, and many other countries. And it was a global transformation of state of affairs.
У нас мало времени, и какие-то вещи я буду объяснять коротко по причине того, что ну, каждая из них требует отдельной лекции.
So since we do not have much time, I'm going to cover certain bullet points very shortly, because if every point would be deepened enough, then it would necessitate a separate lecture for every bullet point.
И вы, наверное, понимаете, что навыки с воздуха не появляются из воздуха.
And certainly you would understand that any skill, doesn't matter what kind of skill we're speaking about, it doesn't appear just from nowhere.
И то, что я сейчас буду говорить, для очень многого количества людей будет новостью, но если они внимательно изучат вопрос, то они поймут и природу, и что делать в какой как бы ситуации.
And things that I'm going to cover just in a bit might be news for many people. However, if they look into the origin and make an analysis, it will become very clear what types of skills should be used in which kind of circumstances.
То есть, по сути своей, любая бизнес-структура имеет одну из 4 классических форм.
In essence, any business structure has 4 different classical forms.
То есть универсальной формой считается корабельная форма.
The universal form of a business is considered to be the ship model.
То есть модель корабля является универсальной формой, где есть капитан, старший помощник, ну и так далее. Это все члены команды.
So a model of a ship is a universal model where you have a certain system governed by one captain and other people on the team, and each of them has his own functions.
Вторая структура – это производственная.
Second type of the structure is the production type of business.
То есть это военная структура.
Which is military type.
То есть директор как главнокомандующий, завод, цеха как подразделения военные, как бы и так далее и тому подобное.
And in the form of a commander, we have a director of the structure, and there are different units that manufacture specific things.
Третья форма связана со сферой профессиональных услуг.
And third type of business is related to the area of professional services.
Это структура религиозных рыцарских орденов.
And historically, it would correspond to the structure of religious chivalric orders.
Да. И заканчивается это все торговлей.
And it ends with trade.
Да, это церковная структура.
Which corresponds to the clerical structures.
То есть были случаи, когда сфера профессиональных услуг принимала корабельную форму.
And yes, there were cases when a business of professional services type would take up different form, which would relate to the ship model form.
Так как она универсальна.
Because the ship model is universal, as it was mentioned.
Были случаи, когда производство принимало корабельную форму.
There were also cases when the production type of businesses would take, again, that ship model type.
Были случаи, когда, так сказать, сфера профессиональных услуг принимала корабельную форму.
And there were cases when other types of the businesses also would take ship model.
Это не лучшая для нее форма, но допустимая.
It is not the professional.
Да.
It is not the best form for professional services type of businesses. However, I mean, it can exist.
И только торговля никогда никакой, кроме церковной формы, не принимала.
And only trade type businesses have never ever taken different shapes except this church model that they correlate to.
И теперь вам будет очень легко взять, например, корабль и разобраться, кто там за кадры отвечает, кто за маркетинг и как это делается.
And from now on, based on this model, it's very easy to look into the nature of the businesses. By taking the ship model, you can find out who is responsible for HR, who has to be responsible for marketing department, and so on.
То же самое со всеми остальными формами. Теперь, когда вы это знаете, будет очень просто как бы разобраться. Спасибо за внимание.
And the same relates to all other forms. And since now this model is obvious, it would become easy for people to do their own research. Thank you very much for attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maltsev, for your speech. Let me please kindly remind you we're discussing the origins of business construction elements like human resource, marketing, etc. And right now, let me please give the floor to our president, Professor Jerome Krase. You're welcome. Please turn on your mic.
Okay. First of all, I must apologize for coming on late, but I was teaching a class and I had some student issues. That's the most important thing. I think for the first question, I have relatively a few remarks. I might make more intelligent contributions for the second part. But I tend to think of the question of business and the term of business in a particular kind of way that perhaps the rest of you share. But I think of business and kind of compare it to work. Okay, if you're talking about the idea of the development of business historically or archaeologically or anthropologically. We think of business as somehow or another different than work, okay? And work has always existed. I mean, human beings as animals, of course, have always had to work in order to survive. But we begin to think of business in a different kind of a way. If we jump way ahead, and we'll go back in a minute, whether we're talking Weberianly or Marxianly, okay, not Marxistly, but Marxianly, there's a different determination of the morality of the system of the work and the production in the work. So for me, and I think for many sociologists of my generation, which is an old one, business is a peculiar kind of a social relationship. So you can perform work and do economic activity singularly. All right, you can survive as a autonomous human being and engage in work and engage in production and all kinds of things, but it won't be business until it's some kind of a social relationship that is a relationship with another human being. So that's what I mean by a peculiar kind of a social relationship, which of course includes reproduction and things like that too, as a kind of a work, as an activity, and also can become a business at some point, but we won't deal with that right now. Now, business also, I think about it as an exchange, okay? It's an exchange between individuals, individual groups, etc., organizations. And when we think of exchange, we have to admit that exchanges take place because there's the idea of getting more out of the exchange than we put into the exchange, right? Although some people talk about barter, etc., but there's that it's a social relationship, and when we think of social relationships as exchange, there's always the idea of benefiting from the relationship, which I would think about in terms of getting more out of the exchange than you put into it. So as far as business is concerned, then the skill. All right, so now we're talking about a social activity, and therefore we need skills to engage in these activities, particularly in the competitive sense. So the skill is in the creating and the maintaining of an unequal relationship. That's where you create a business. You got to figure out a way of creating and maintaining an unequal relationship between yourself or your organization and some other social entity. And of course, these can be voluntary or involuntary, right? So this is even true of barter, where anthropologists often talk about, well, the beginning of things is an exchange of barter where we have equal things of equal value, okay? But we have to understand that in this exchange, even of different kinds of things, there are different evaluations of what is being equally exchanged, right? When we think in terms of that kind of exchange, even in terms of barter, we think we're getting something more than what we gave away. We have an excess of this, so therefore we're going to get something that we don't have. We tend to give away things or to exchange things that we have a surplus of. And surplus, of course, in terms of the surplus value is essentially no value. Okay. So we also tend to say we're doing business means to make a gain. Right, so good business is a deal where you gain, not a loss. Bad business is a bad deal, okay, and it's something to be avoided. So this, in turn, they're looking at this at a microcosmic level at the present time, is it leads to a concentration of gains in wealth because we have unequal exchanges. Okay. Eventually what will occur, some will have more, some will have less. Has to be that way. And that in turn, thinking of ourselves as human beings, even in terms of conversations that we have, which in essence can be thought about as business, what we're engaging in here, leads to an avoidance, right? An avoidance of voluntary participation by the losers. Right? Just think about it in terms of even have a conversation. If you're losing in the conversation, what you're going to do is you're going to retreat from it. And the same thing is true of business, all right? So you remove from the voluntary participation when you're a loser, or what you do, right? Another thing is, well, I'll end on these couple of sentences for us to think about it, because we spoke about criminality a while ago, or it leads to theft. All right. In other words, if we can't, by following the rules in this exchange, gain a profit, right, we're going to retreat from it, look for different relationships, or violate the rules, which we would call theft, meaning the violations of the rules for the gain. So that's the way I think about business. And I hope this adds to the conversation, but it's essentially the way that I look at business as opposed to other kinds of economic work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Krase. Thank you. So right now, let me please give the floor to our next speaker, Alan Shapiro. You're welcome, sir. Please turn on your microphone.
Okay. Well, I decided I'm going to use my 10 minutes to talk about a specific chapter in American business history that I know something about. And it's also part of technology history and the computer and digitalization. And it's something that happened in January 1984 when the Macintosh personal computer with the graphical user interface was introduced. Now, state my conclusion right away, which is that the creative pioneers of the internet and of the computer industry are caught in a contradiction. And what it is, these were, and this is often called the California ideology, which I have my own take on, which is slightly different from the person who coined that term. But on the one hand, they had idealistic utopian ideas for the internet as information and knowledge available for free to everyone. So it would be a tool, a platform for democracy, decentralization. On the other hand, there was this kind of worship of the individual entrepreneur, which you would say is the right-wing libertarianism of that Silicon Valley. The Steve Jobs, the Bill Gates, today it's Elon Musk or Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos. So I think it's an interesting contradiction. What does it mean, this kind of elevation of the individual entrepreneur who creates a new generation of powerful companies that replaces the previous group of powerful companies? Because that's how I think the history of capitalism kind of works. Now, in January 1984, Ridley Scott, a Hollywood director of science fiction films like Blade Runner and the Alien series, was hired by Steve Jobs to make a 60-second TV commercial introducing the Mac. And it was shown during the halftime of the Super Bowl, the American Football Championship, where tens of millions of people watch these TV commercials. Now, the imagery that Ridley Scott used was from George Orwell's 1984, identifying IBM, which had dominated the computer industry as a monopoly, and the paradigm of the computer was as a calculation machine. And it's all shot in black and white, and all the people are dressed in drab clothing like drones, looking up at a big screen of Big Brother giving a 1984-like speech. There's a woman wearing sports clothes and with a sledgehammer. She's in color, like this one woman in color, everything else in black and white. The thought police are chasing after her. She's a cultural revolutionary. She's going to destroy Big Brother and the monopoly of IBM. And then at the end of the 60 seconds, what flashes on the screen are the words, on January 23rd, Apple Computer introduces the Macintosh so that 1984 won't be like 1984, meaning the year 1984 won't be like the dystopian novel about totalitarianism by Orwell, 1984. Of course, just as in the year 2000, people were expecting the bug that was going to crash everything. Just before 1984, people were wondering what the heck is going to happen when this year actually occurs. So the computer, the revolution of 1984 was selling to the public the personal computer as a tool for personal empowerment, that you, the individual, were now going to be able to use the computer for your own creativity, for desktop publishing. It then became an appliance for media, consumerism, playing games, online shopping, and so on. So it was a total paradigm shift in what the computer was from a calculation machine. But this advertising rhetoric of personal empowerment was what really sold it. Now, it's also interesting in terms of the business history. How did Bill Gates, multi-billion-dollar fortune happen? How did he trick? I mean, it's brilliant the way that he tricked IBM was when he sold them the disk operating system and then said, well, actually, I want to retain ownership so I can sell it to like Compaq and Dell and these Taiwanese and Chinese clone manufacturers of PCs, and IBM agreed to that because they made big mistakes. They don't understand that the software was where the money was going to be, not in the hardware as they were used to. Then you have this whole history of Steve Jobs and Bill Gates stealing ideas from each other and from Xerox PARC, because actually the innovations of the graphical user interface, the mouse, the desktop metaphor, drag and drop, the folders and files and icons was all developed in the Palo Alto Research Center of Xerox, but Xerox being a dinosaur monopoly company similar to IBM, they didn't even understand the brass, the money powerful people in New York didn't understand what these California hippies were doing. And then Steve Jobs visited the Xerox Park and got all those ideas. And then Bill Gates copied, and then they sued each other. Now, interesting that you could say this whole personal computer revolution, the first wave of digitalization, it started from political revolution and cultural revolution. You know, California in the 60s, the anti-Vietnam War movement, the psychedelic drugs, people dropping out, hippies, civil rights, all that 60s counterculture stuff. And then a few of those people were also interested in technology and computer science and had the idea, I want a computer for me. And then this hobby, you know, there were lots of little companies competing and so on. So I guess my point is that we should never think that capitalism is finished. We should think that, you know, creativity, rebellion, I think the cultural rebel is an important figure in business history, and then it drives a new set of companies replacing the previous one. And then in the whole digitalization business, going back and forth between the ideas of utopia, democracy, peer-to-peer, decentralization, and then monopolies which come in and take it over, as we have now again with the big social media platforms. So I think my 10 minutes are up. Yes?
Yes, sure. So have you finished your speech?
Yeah, well, just to round it at the end, I think it's a contradiction between the creative ideas that and then this placing then believing in an almost mystical way in the magic of this charismatic entrepreneur, and then putting power in his hands.
Thank you so much, Professor Shapiro. Thank you for your speech. And right away, let me please give the floor to our next expert, Dr. Alexander Sagaidak. You're welcome. Please turn on your mic. Пожалуйста, включите микрофон.
Здравствуйте, коллеги.
Greetings, dear colleagues.
Юнгианская психология примечательна тем, что во всяком явлении она стремится отыскать его архетипическую основу.
The Jungian psychology, the psychology school established by Carl Gustav Jung, is characterized with a specific approach of searching the roots of phenomena, the archetypological root of it.
То есть корни, уходящие в древнюю историю или даже в доисторические времена.
By this archetypological structure, we mean the roots that go back to the history legacy or even the prehistory legacy times.
Может показаться, что бизнес – это изобретение модернистское, изобретение нового времени, поэтому искать архетипическую основу смысла нет.
Well, to some extent, it may seem that actually business is the phenomena that was generated in the new era or new epoch, or maybe it is some sort of invention of modern times. And if it is, so why should we go back to the history so deep?
Однако это не так. И если мы внимательно посмотрим на историю человечества, а вернее даже на доисторическую эпоху, то мы увидим, что истоки бизнеса, предпринимательства лежат таком удивительном явлении, как неолитическая революция.
However, it's not like that. We should say that actually the roots of this business phenomena are going back even to the prehistoric time, and they roots in the very specific phenomena that we may call the Neolithic Revolution.
До этого удивительного периода основной формой хозяйства человеческого общества было присваивающее хозяйство.
So long before this Neolithic period, we should say that the basic common culture, I mean the economic culture of communication, was the assignment. So people used to take, to grab, and to assign.
Основными занятиями в присваивающем хозяйстве были охота, рыболовство, собирательство, и некоторые антропологи добавляют еще к этому каннибализм.
So, as a matter of fact, if we are speaking about allocation, we should say there is such sorts of activities like hunting, like natural resource collection, and some people, some anthropologists, I mean, some scholars, they even should say that cannibalism is also the part of that activity.
Неолитическая революция состояла в том, что появились консолидированные, хорошо организованные общины, где главными занятиями становятся земледелие.
So actually speaking about the Neolithic transformation or Neolithic revolution, we should say that the main activity switched to some other sort of shape. I mean that actually the consolidated communes have emerged, and by that very moment, the most specific activity was the farming.
И, как я уже сказал, главными занятиями в таких обществах становятся земледелие, животноводство, но и традиционно добавляют еще одну профессию – проституцию, утверждая, что она еще древнее, чем две первых.
Well, as a matter of fact, among these consolidated communities members, apart from farming, apart from animal husbandry, there is also one more activity. This is prostitution, since there are scholars who claim that actually prostitution is even more ancient rather than farming or hunting, etc.
Таким образом, хозяйство из присваивающего становится производящим.
So actually, the economy farming from allocation is becoming generating one. So it starts generating new resources.
Однако, что бы ни производили люди, продукты питания или товары или что-либо еще, главным результатом их производства является производство искусственной среды обитания, цивилизации и культуры.
However, it doesn't matter what is the main product of this agricultural economy process, whether we mean the services or we mean certain goods. By this, actually, we mean the artificial farming sphere. I mean the civilization. This is the main result or the basic product of this transformation.
То есть на протяжении вот уже более 9000 лет основной формой производства в человеческом обществе является производство социальных отношений.
So by the basic form of production in the human society for more than 9,000 years, we actually face the production of social attitudes or the social production. This is the major issue.
И появление капиталистического способа производства и бизнеса в его современном понимании вывело производство социальных отношений на принципиально новый уровень.
And since the entrepreneurship and businessship commenced and took its place in history, we should say that this basic form of production was raised, I mean the social production was just raised to another level.
Однако что мы наблюдаем сейчас? Как известно, мы сейчас живем в эпоху общества потребления.
However, what do we witness right now? As a matter of fact, today we live in the period of the society of consumption. That's what we live in right now.
И на первый план выходит не производство, а опять-таки присваивание, как 9000 лет назад.
And in this consumption society, the basic activity form is not the generation. We're not generating. We're foremostly appropriating something, taking away.
Но если 9000 лет назад наши предки присваивали то, что было создано природой,
However, if 9,000 years ago our forefathers would appropriate things that actually were natural, I mean, what nature gave us,
то сейчас общество потребления присваивает то, что было создано предыдущими поколениями.
right now we have a little bit different tendency, since today in the consumption society, the members of this society, they actually appropriate the welfare that was generated by previous generations.
А это исчерпаемый ресурс и довольно быстро исчерпаемый.
And we should say that this is some sort of exhaustible resource. And moreover, it's not only exhaustible, it may be exhausted pretty fast in a rapid way.
Поэтому, если мы говорим о реальной экономике и реальном бизнесе,
So speaking about the real economy and real business,
мы должны помнить о том, что прежде всего в нем должен присутствовать вот этот вектор социального конструктивизма. Вектор
we should definitely recall the main idea that the vector of social constructivism should be appropriate to this approach.
Вектор производства социальных отношений, то есть формирование новых социальных ролей, новых позиций, а самое главное, новых целей социального развития.
And by this vector of social attitude generation, we mean that actually we should generate and shape the new roles of society, the new positions of society. That's what should be done.
Потому что если базироваться на концепции потребления, то есть социальные отношения нужно только потреблять, но уже не нужно производить.
And the most important issue that we should focus on is the new social aims. Since in the society of consumption, if we are constantly consuming something, not doing anything else,
то это фактически означает, что общество достигло идеального состояния, к которому уже нечего прибавить, и надо только использовать.
In fact, that means that this consumption society has reached so-called ideal peak. And that means that if we are consuming everything, we don't need anything else. We don't need to reach anything else or attain new goals.
Однако, как мы знаем, невзирая на известную книгу, конец истории так и не наступил.
However, judging a book by its title, I mean, the end of history, we should say that the end of history is still not, well, it's not what we see right now. It's in the future, maybe, who knows.
История продолжается, и она должна продолжаться именно как производство цивилизации и культуры.
So the history goes on, or as in Americans say, the show goes on, and actually it generates the culture, it generates itself foremostly.
Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you so much for your kind attention. Thank you so much, Dr. Alexander Sagaidak. And right now, let me please give the floor to our next speaker, Pavel Pedina. You're welcome. Please turn on your mic.
Благодарю за возможность выступить в такой высокой экспертной и научной среде. Для меня это большая честь.
To begin with, I would like to thank you for the opportunity for giving me the floor and delivering my report in terms of this high, let me say, prominent expert sphere. I'm honored to be the part of this scholar circle.
Я являюсь руководителем Европейского общества защиты кредитов, которое занимается изучением деловой репутации компаний.
Pavel Pedina is heading the European Credit Protection Society that is investigating the business reputation.
Кредитоспособности компании и инвестиционной привлекательности.
As well as this, the activity also includes selecting investment projects, investing appealing projects, as well as judging the credibility of clients.
В своей деятельности мне приходится в компаниях как раз рассматривать эти 4 бизнес-конструкции.
And in my activity, I mean, in activity of Pavel, he has to focus on the basic business elements. Among them, there are 4 elements.
Коммуникационная система, менеджмент, кадры и технологии.
By 4 elements, we mean the communication, management itself, HR department, and technologies.
И в общей сумме эти 4 элемента, они говорят о деловой репутации компании и ее кредитоспособности.
Overall, these 4 elements listed, they actually shape the business reputation of the company as well as credibility on the market.
В какой-то период времени я был вынужден вернуться к праотцам своей деятельности и разобраться, а как возникло, как было раньше.
At a certain period of time, I set myself a task, I actually set a goal to focus on the practice of our forefathers, I mean of the forefathers of this activity. How did this all happen? How was it all settled in the very beginning?
И для этого я выбрал 2 компании, КСВ 1870 Австрия и Dun & Bradstreet США.
And for this sake, as the issues to analyze, the 2 companies were selected. I mean the KSV 1870 Austria as well as Dun & Bradstreet USA.
И в момент создания данных компаний, при зарождении буржуазной революции, уже тогда компании в своих отчетах так же само обращались к этим 4 элементам бизнес-конструкции.
And right at the moment these 2 companies just emerged, I mean both Dun & Bradstreet and KSV, actually they in their reports, and we should say that these reports are dated back to the end of bourgeois revolutions, the staff of these companies, they also mentioned these 4 elements. I mean business, HR, communication, and technologies.
Причина появления такой профессиональной услуги и сферы деятельности выступил обман, банкротство, что порождало запрос на эту деятельность.
And to my viewpoint, the main idea, the main reason for the fact such companies emerged is the deception. By deception, as the phenomena, we mean like the bankruptcy, the lack of credibility, and all these things they pushed and actually made humanity to shape these new branches of services.
И только рассматривая компании с этих 4 элементов, мы как-то можем взять под контроль обман.
Moreover, only investigating the company on the basis of these 4 elements listed, somehow, I mean, only using this approach, we are getting capable to control the deception, to exclude it.
Я не есть ученый и могу только сформировать свою гипотезу.
Since I'm not a scholar, since I'm not a scientist, I only can formulate my hypothesis, deliver just a hypothesis.
Я увлекаюсь историей рыцарских орденов и много лет возглавлял банк.
First of all, our speaker is fond of chivalric order history, and secondly, for quite a long period of time, he was the head of a bank.
И если тот, кто знаком с банковской историей, он знает, что многие продукты возникли из деятельности тамплиеров.
And those who are actually keen on researching the banking history, they know that lots of services actually are rooted back to the history of Templars.
То есть тамплиеры породили сферу профессиональных услуг как банковское дело.
I mean, the Templar order, the members of Templar order that actually generated, they gave the foundation to the sphere, to the professional sphere of banking. They are the forefathers.
Я не удивлюсь, если орденские структуры выступили в роли, которые породили современные компании.
And it wouldn't be such a great surprise up to me, according to this hypothesis, that the chivalric orders would be these prototypes that actually generated the business companies we are seeing today.
То есть орденские структуры ретрансформировались, и задачи, которые они решали до этого, перешли в бизнес-задачи.
I mean that the chivalric order structures, they were just retransforming throughout the history. However, the nature of the tasks that were implemented back those days, they didn't change much, and we see them today as business tasks.
И вместо мечей и плащей это ретрансформировалось в компании, но цели завоевания территорий, богатства так и остались.
And maybe we don't see too many swords, or I mean like knights with their swords and daggers and shields. We don't see that. However, we see that the main task of the business is still the same. It didn't change. I mean, to take the new lands, or like take the new markets and to grab it.
Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you so much for your kind attention. Thank you, Pavel. And I guess that right now it's high time we started a discussion on the second point of our online panel. Let me kindly remind you, this is people and consumer society, or the place of the person in consumer society. And right away, let me please give the floor to our speaker, Professor Jerome Krase. You're welcome, please.
Okay. It was interesting is I'm muting myself here when I've just taught a Zoom class and I was in charge. I'm not used to not being in charge, you know. Thank you very much. As usual with these conversations, I learn a lot more than I'm able to give in return. I think for the second question, I probably have more to contribute than I did the first time around. And that's because this is a topic which is very much of interest to me. And as usual for most discussions, I translate the question into something I can answer. Okay, first of all, I'd like to say very thankful for not only the discussion of the banking and the Templars that most people would be unfamiliar with, the importance of these ways of engaging in business and how much business is involved with the rest of society. Particularly what we think, most people think in terms of Templars, in terms of the religious aspect, and don't understand the degree to which conquest and religion is also a business activity. Also, I'd like to start off by talking about what Alan Shapiro said, which is very helpful to me because it's a way that I was going to address this question, and that's in terms of digital and virtual technology. And I should remind us, I don't think I have to remind him, is that this kind of hope, you know, every time we get this new technology, particularly if it's new communications technology, such as writing, right? Such as even writing back in terms of cuneiform, in terms of being able to change a business, and the great hopes for these kinds of things. And the Bible, the printing press, etc. All of these things, including in our lifetimes, the idea of the telephone and the radio and the television as to be things which were going to democratize information, access to information, and also the exchange of information. And again, going back to business, when we're talking about communication in this context, we're talking about the business of communication, where all the things that I said in my opening remarks will apply. You know, is this idea, there's now this digital, this virtual revolution has really not changed social relationships. What happens is what they tend to do is there tends to be this delay, which I think Alan also talked about, until entrepreneurs and others figure out a way of creating social exchanges, businesses, etc., at which they can benefit, which means taking away from others. I mean, that's what business is all about. And I want to give a couple of examples which bring up this question about where do we get information and how does information get to us? And the first thing I would want to say is going to my friend Baudrillard, and that is to understand, okay, that the empty vessel is the most important in communication technology. How is that the vessel, meaning us in our minds, how is it emptied or not filled in the first place, and then filled or refilled? And we have to understand that simulation now, particularly with this technology, makes it possible for the creation of the perfect consumer, right? The perfect consumer is the consumer who is consumable, right? It's something which, you know, we become things which are consumable, and not simply in communications technology, but in all aspects of it. We can be devoured. Our thoughts can be devoured, okay? And our bodies can too. So I'm going to think about a number of things which are interrelated. It may be confusing, but that's what communication is all about. I tell my students that they can't learn anything unless they have a question. So therefore, what I frequently do is I say things which are not easily understood, right? Which primes the mind to be filled. And I remember visiting the Anne Frank Memorial in Amsterdam. And they had a display there of German newspapers of the time. And I remember looking at it. Those kinds of places are, you know, difficult for most of us that think, right? And I remember reading a headline in a German newspaper: "Die Juden sind unser Unglück." The Jews are our unluck, our disaster. Where does that come from? First of all, we look at it, we say, well, here's a newspaper headline. But the newspaper headline is an outcome, right? It's an outcome. It's something which is a product from someplace else, you know, and where is the vessel and how is that vessel filled? Now, many years after I had visited the Anne Frank Memorial, I was teaching in Poland at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow. I was teaching American Studies. And I was talking about multiculturalism, you know, which is a dirty word evidently in Poland. Then they didn't know what the word meant, but now they have it and they know they don't like it. At least some of the politicians don't. And my students, very nice young men and women, said to me, "Why did the Jews hate us? Why did the Jews hate us?" And I say to myself, these are university students, and they seem not to have a really good hold on the history, not so much the history of their country, but of the history of what occurred in the space that they occupy. So it's another sense of empty vessel, or a vessel that's filled, all right, or left unfilled, all right? Again, coming back again to another thing, teaching myself, right? Learning myself at the same time of teaching in a class, a young African-American student raises his hand in my class and said to me, "Is it true, Professor Krase, that the Jews invented AIDS to kill Africans?" Where does that question come from? Where does that come from? What vessel, empty vessel, was filled? Where did that information come from? Okay, and so again, simulation without technology, right? Information is created. And these are, in a sense, these are perfect consumers. Ordinary people, they just don't consume stuff to buy. They consume stuff, right, that influences the way that they act in their society. And the current technology makes simulation much easier, makes it much more possible to commodify, to turn into something which can be sold. And all these ideas that I just spoke about were things which were sold. People paid for them, whether they paid for them in cash or they paid for them in their lives, okay? They were commodified, right? And so the technology today makes it possible to commodify virtually everything. And we think about that in terms of advertising, okay? So again, the instances I mentioned were part of advertising. Somebody advertised this stuff. Somebody sent this information out in newspapers, on radio, in TV, all right? And it was consumed by consumable people. Today in politics, for example, I'll talk about American politics because it's closest to me, is the distance between politics and motherhood are eliminated. Now, motherhood, which is this wonderful value, right? Motherhood, etc. Motherhood is used also in simulation, communication, process, and politics. All right, so most recently, and I'll save this for the thing I have to write, I was deluged, because as recently was Mother's Day, and I was deluged with political advertisement from people running for office talking about their mothers, right? So you have people running for political office, all right, who commodified their mothers. They consumed their mothers. And in some ways, they regurgitated their mothers in emails, okay? I'll just mention a few more things because I know the time is limited. Here, what has to be mentioned in my training is Jürgen Habermas, right? So for Habermas, in order to have freedom and freedom of information, etc., the ideal speech situation must ensure unlimited discussion, which is free from all constraints of domination, right? Free from all. Oh, where can we get information like that? This was the hope of the internet, etc. And if you search around, you can find it. But remember, you have to be a very, very smart and able consumer in order to find those kinds of things, because there's a conscious strategy, right? Always has been, to communicate to things to us so that we can be benefited from. In other words, that we can be consumed. Next thing I want to mention, just another two things, and that is by Shibutani, talking about improvised news. Okay, and it's a sociological study of rumor. It's an old one. I'm old too, right? And that's the idea of in times of difficult circumstances, etc. There's a need for information, and of course, what occurs is the information can be created. It can be improvised, right? Whether it's true or false, right? The smart person, the smart individual, the smart organization will create, right? Will create the instability in order to fill the vessel. Right? It's very important for us to see that, right? And this is a group characteristic, not a necessarily individual characteristic. And then the last one is about propaganda, which we throw about that word all day. Everything is propaganda. Well, in a sense, everything is propaganda. It's purposeful information. And my friend Alfred McClung Lee had written a wonderful book, The Fine Art of Propaganda, talking about how that was done. And here he was talking about in the United States in the 1930s with Father Coughlin, who was a Catholic priest with a great following, who was an anti-Semite, right? And so that what the story was all about, what the book is all about, is how he was able to accomplish this. In other words, it's a lesson in how this can be done. And I'm very grateful for Al, who passed away quite a while ago, that he gave me a proof copy of that particular book. So I think we can take these interrelated factors here and talk about the consumer, okay? And of course, my concern, the products that I'm most concerned with are political and moral ideals that are being put in the minds of the empty vessels. So thank you very much. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives. Thank you so much, Professor Krase. And right away, let me please give the floor to our next speaker, Dr. Oleg Maltsev. You're welcome.
Спасибо, что дали слово.
Thank you for giving me the floor.
Ну, когда мы говорим о мнении Baudrillarda об обществе потребления, я думаю, что Baudrillard изложил это мнение в своей работе, как бы повторяться я не буду.
Speaking about consumer society through the prism of Baudrillard, certainly he already did an amazing job in his book, so I'm not going to repeat him.
Но вот о некоторых моментах этого общества потребления я бы все-таки хотел поговорить.
But I would like to highlight and speak about some characteristics of this consumer society.
Общество потребления делит людей на две категории.
Consumer society divides society and people into two categories.
Первая категория лиц – это люди, которые обществу не позволяют определять свое место.
First category of people that do not permit the society to determine or define their position in the society.
Потому что само наличие общества потребления предполагает, что это общество ваше место определяет в обществе.
Because the existence of consumer society in the first place already inexplicitly has the idea that it would define your place in the society.
Ну, я как раз хотел поговорить не о людях в обществе потребления, а как раз о бизнесменах в обществе потребления.
And I would like to point attention not to people in the society of consumption, but to businessmen in this society.
Потому что про людей Baudrillard достаточно много и подробно написал.
Because Baudrillard wrote quite extensively about people in general.
Его упрекнуть в любви к людям нельзя.
I mean, you cannot try to pick or embarrass him in his love for the humanity.
Да, столько прекрасных терминов он для них придумал.
He came up with wonderful terms, different terms that would characterize people in general.
Так вот, когда мы говорим о бизнесе в структуре общества потребления,
And speaking about business in the structure of this consumer society,
это как раз те люди, которые не желают, чтобы общество определяло их место в этом обществе потребления.
it is about that first category of people, the businessmen, that do not want to permit the society to define their place.
И в обществе потребления, по сути своей, у человека нет выбора. Либо становиться бизнесменом, либо общество будет определять твое место.
And roughly speaking, in the consumer society, people do not have many choices. They become a consequence of consumer society or become businessmen.
То есть и не только ваше место, но и все остальное, даже то, о чем вы думать должны.
And consumer society defines not only a place of a human being in the society, but even what he or she has to think about.
Но профессор Sagaidak, как всегда, как бы не в бровь, а в глаз, сказал, что в рамках этого консилиума все ресурсы исчерпаемы. Ну, то есть как бы нет вот вечного двигателя, откуда можно было черпать, вот вечной какой-то субстанции, с которой можно было бы вечно вычерпывать, да?
And Professor Sagaidak, as always, very was very accurate in highlighting that in terms of speaking of consumer society, all their resources are finite, meaning that there's nothing like eternal, like perpetuum mobile type of thing.
И вот об этом, кстати, практически никто не думает. То есть никому эта тема особо не интересна.
And not many people are interested in this subject.
Хотя, в общем-то, вы знаете, откройте любой учебник экономики, он начинается с того, что ресурсы редкие.
Even though any textbook on economics would start with the saying that all resources are scarce or finite.
Ну, то есть, по сути своей, открываете МакКоннелла, Самуэльсона, любую классику, как бы первая глава начинается с того, что ресурсы редкие, а желание их потреблять, ну, как бы больше, чем они их существуют, да?
And this would refer to any classics, be it McConnell or Samuelson or other authors. It's all about their main idea in the beginning is that the resources are finite, but the desire to consume that is infinite.
И вот здесь как бы возникает вопрос, а в чем же цель бизнесмена в этом обществе как бы потребления?
And in here we have a question. So what is the goal of people in business when it comes to their, them being in the consumer society?
То есть, по сути своей, все говорят о ком угодно, кроме о том, о чем поговорить важнее всего, по причине того, что вы сейчас увидите, как эта проблема одного бизнесмена становится всеобщей проблемой.
And generally, people do not speak about things that should be spoken about generally, like all over the globe. However, now it will become obvious how a problem of one businessman becomes the problem of many other people around him.
Вы представьте себе, в 20 лет парень проснулся и решил стать бизнесменом.
Let's just hypothetically imagine a situation, 20-year-old young man, he wakes up in the morning and decides to become a businessman.
И все занято.
But everything, all spots are busy. There's no place for him.
То все места, все отрасли, все уже давным-давно придумано и занято.
All industries, all ideas, everything already does exist today.
И даже если он создает какой-то бизнес, который, в общем-то, начинает быть успешным, ему ставит это общество потребления сверхзадачу.
And even if he succeeds in establishing a certain enterprise, which, works somehow, then this consumer society sets for him higher complexity tasks.
То есть стремление к нулевой себестоимости.
In other words, which is about a direction to the zero net cost.
То есть что такое нулевая себестоимость?
So what is zero net cost?
Это когда вы, по сути своей, ничего не вкладывали в то, что продаете.
So this concept is about that you have not invested even a penny into a product that you're selling.
Вы скажете, так возможно только в одном случае, если вы что-то украли.
And you may say this is an option only in one case, if you have stolen something and you are selling that thing.
Это касается людей в обществе потребления, но никак не касается бизнесменов.
And this does relate to people in consumer society, but doesn't relate to business people.
Потому что бизнесмены придумали потрясающую вещь, которая называется политический маркетинг.
Because businessmen came up with a very cunning thing, which is titled a political marketing.
Я вам сейчас объясню, как работает эта штуковина, как это объяснял Baudrillard.
And I would like to explain now how the structure works as it was meant by Jean Baudrillard.
Вот вчера наш коллега с вами, американский профессор, возмущался, почему Blackwater получает огромные деньги от правительства США за то, что воюет вместо США в других регионах мира.
So yesterday on the panel, our colleague, professor from the US, was very dissatisfied. He was very anxious about the fact why the private company Blackwater is receiving billions from American government so that other people, instead of military people, go and fight for the wars of the US somewhere overseas.
И все очень внимательно его послушали, но ответа на вопросы так и не получили.
Everybody listened very attentively, but we did not get any answer.
Так вот, дело в том, что в Америке погибшие американские солдаты – это очень непопулярно.
The whole point is that in the first place, generally speaking, in the America, US soldiers that are dying in the wars is not something popular.
И Америка, надо сказать, надо отдать ей должное, из Вьетнама извлекла все уроки.
And we should give the due credit to the US that it was able to learn all necessary lessons after Vietnam War.
И когда профессиональная американская армия, предположим, захватывает какую-то страну, потому что ей нравится вот этой администрации президента какие-то полезные ископаемые в этой стране.
And when, let's say, a professional army, US Army, conquers a certain territory because of the current administration desires to have some resources over that territory,
Это же скандал
it is a scandal.
на весь мир.
And it is a global scandal.
А давайте теперь вместо американской армии это захватит какая-то частная компания типа Blackwaters.
And in contrast to this, let's just imagine that instead of American troops, that specific territory is going to be conquered not by the American soldiers, but by a private company, let's say Blackwaters.
Что произошло?
What did happen?
Ну, виноватых-то нет.
I mean, there's nobody to blame,
Да, а полезные ископаемые есть.
but useful resources are there.
И они абсолютно бесплатно.
And those resources are for free.
Ну, вы же прекрасно понимаете, кто же будет платить за полезные ископаемые кому-то, когда мы уже ими владеем.
So who would pay for those resources to somebody when they already own them?
Вот так возникает нулевая себестоимость.
And this is how the zero net cost emerges.
То есть, по сути своей, я могу таких примеров 2-3 тысячи привести.
And I can give examples as such, like 2,000, 3,000 examples. They're all over.
То есть, это касается не только Соединенных Штатов Америки, это касается всех игроков рынка.
And one thing that I want people to understand that this doesn't relate only to United States of America. This would relate to every player on the global market.
Я же могу не захватывать территорию, у меня таких возможностей нет. Ну, я могу, например, попросить кого-то из своих знакомых в правоохранительных органах посадить всех моих конкурентов и забрать рынок себе.
For instance, if somebody in the position when he is not capable of conquering a territory, not that big player, then another scenario, what people do and what might be done by them is that they they appeal to their friend who works in the law enforcement agency, and that officer, he just takes to the prison all of his competitors.
Вы скажете, это недобросовестная конкуренция.
And certainly you will say this is an unfair competition in the market.
Это смотря как это называть.
And it is, but it depends on how it is termed.
Если вы знаете, что я это делаю, то это недобросовестная конкуренция, а если нет?
When we know that somebody is doing that, yes, it is an unethical competition on market. But what if people and we do not know about that? Then how it is titled in such a case?
Но вы скажете, вы же можете честно вести бизнес и никогда не пользоваться подобными мерзкими методами.
One may say, well, you can lead an honest business and never use those nasty methods.
В том-то все и дело, что общество потребления ставит сверхзадачу нулевой себестоимости. Поэтому как вы ее будете решать, его не интересует.
And that's the point, because the consumer society sets the task of having that zero net cost, and it doesn't care how you're going to implement that task.
То есть вы сами должны придумывать, как вы решаете вопрос нулевой себестоимости. Если вы его не решаете, вы банкрот.
So it's up to people. I mean, they're set by this task just from nowhere, and if a person doesn't figure out how to achieve that zero net cost, then he goes bankrupt.
Если вы его решаете, то вы становитесь процветающей компанией.
And if somehow a person finds a way to get that net cost, which is zero, then it becomes a flourishing company.
Теперь, как Павел Pedina сказал, что он не ученый и поэтому может сомневаться и гипотезы выдвигал. Что касается тамплиеров, то они создали финансовую систему, а не банковскую.
And now commenting the speech of Pavel Pedina, he said that he's not a scholar, so he might be mistaken, and so he hypothesized. And so I'm commenting that Templars created financial structure and not the banking structure.
Теперь, что касается банковской системы.
And coming to the banking system,
банковская система во всех учебниках, если вы откроете, то вы увидите, что слово «банк» якобы об итальянского слова «банко», то есть скамейка, на которой сидел ростовщик и давал деньги в долг.
So speaking of bank, some sources say that the word appeared from the Italian banco, which is about a bench where a certain mercenary would sit and give away the credit.
На самом деле это не совсем так.
However, factually, that is not completely the case.
То есть, если изучите вопрос более подробно, то поймете, что это корабельный термин.
Once we go deeper in understanding this issue, we understand that the term is related to the Navy. It's the maritime tradition term.
То есть, банком называли кают-компанию.
The cabin company of the ship was titled a bank.
Банком называли бочку, на которой играли в карты вот эти вот моряки.
Also a certain barrel, which was used for card playing by this pirates or whoever in the sea, that was also called bank.
И банком называли сейф в каюте капитана, который как раз банку и соответствует.
And thirdly, the safe box in the captain's cabin was titled a bank, which does manifest what is bank in fact.
Кстати, чтобы вы знали, по сей день в каждой каюте капитана существует такой сейф.
Just for your information, even up to this day, in every captain's cabin, we still have that type of safe box.
Куда сдают все моряки деньги на время плавания, как бы они хранят их в каюте у капитана.
And that safe box is used by all the officers on the ship so that they give their all money and everything to the captain's cabin for the moment they're sailing.
И как вы понимаете, этот навык перешел просто на сушу, когда люди сошли с кораблей.
And as you'd understand, this skill, this tradition was just translated to the land life when those people came from sailing back to the normal life.
Что касается тамплиеров, то они действительно даже не создали, а организовали финансовую систему, потому что, как вы понимаете, организаторы они хорошие, а конструкторы они какие.
And speaking of Templars, yes, this is true. Yes, they did organize. They not only they originated, they organized a financial structure, I would say, because as you know, historically, Templars were great organizers, but they were not as good in constructing something.
А что касается конструкторов, тут как бы мне очень сложно сказать, потому что мы вряд ли узнаем когда-либо конструкторов, которые сконструировали финансовую систему и поручили тамплиерам ее организовать во всем мире.
And as for the constructors, I don't think we will ever find out who they were. I mean, we will not be able to back up with the historical sources, so it's an enigma. Who did construct that financial structure and gave it to Templars for the organization and exploitation of it?
Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you very much for attention.
Thank you so much for your speech, Dr. Maltsev. And right away, let me please give the floor to our next expert, next speaker, Alan Shapiro. You're welcome, sir. Kindly asking to turn on your mic. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so I was asked to speak about Jean Baudrillard and consumer society. So I'm going to say something about this amazing, great book that called La Société de Consommation, Consumer Society, that Baudrillard published in 1970 when he was 41 years old. And then I want to say something about the situation of consumer society today in the year 2021, and how it proves even more how right Baudrillard was, and also how we can update his idea, because I believe we need to think with Baudrillard, think after Baudrillard, and not just do an academic analysis. First, I think this was the Consumer Society of 1970. It was ignored internationally at the time it was published. It is a great work of modern sociology. It's a synthesis, understanding modern society, the America of television, advertising, suburbia, shopping malls, nowhere architectures like airports and McDonald's, Disneyland, media spectacles, entertainment. Baudrillard analyzed all of that. And the book was ignored. The German translation was not published until 2014. The English, not until 1998, the translations of the book. I checked the Russian in 2006, the Spanish in 2009. Only the Italians were aware of Baudrillard, and they published their translation of the book in 76. Now, it was a synthesis of Marx's commodity fetishism, of the Durkheimian school of anthropology and sociology, looking at a society in terms of total social facts. Marshall McLuhan's media theory, the media is the message. The semiotics of Ferdinand de Saussure, semiotics is linguistics applied to culture. And a brilliant book by a historian, which was Daniel Borstein's The Image of 62, which influenced Baudrillard a lot. Baudrillard said, he makes a critique of homo economicus, the idea that consumerism is a place of freedom, of individual choice, where your needs are satisfied. You need what you want, and you want what you need. You're a sovereign individual. He went beyond that homo economicus, and he went also way beyond Marxist understanding of consumerism, which saw consumerism as just a sphere added on to production, where the workers would be manipulated and controlled in their free time. Today, we are now in the digitalization, and we've gone from, obviously, from mass advertising to personalized advertising with algorithms, big data, so-called artificial neural networks. And what happens, and this, I think the structure of personalized advertising and the algorithms is tremendously important. It's the structure that underlies the crisis of democracy with the so-called echo chamber that the people who believe in these conspiracy theories and the far right, that you only get news from your community, from news from the people you already agree with. It's the elimination of the public sphere, the filter bubble of Google. You know, when I do a search, I don't get the same results as you. They want to show me more of what I've already seen. So the personalized advertising, they take my data, my browsing history, my viewing history, and they target me specifically. This establishes a hard, bonded relationship, a hardwired relationship between the companies and the individual. So there's no more this sphere of freedom, because in mass advertising, right, they didn't know your individual data. So like a billboard on the side of the road or a ad on TV, it's throwing this information into a public space, and then supposedly you, the sovereign individual, you buy what you want, you choose what you want. That's gone. You're now hardwired personally to the company through the personalized advertising. So, and I would say, following up on what Jerome said, in my terminology, the person becomes a piece of software. The human being becomes software. If you know how software works, there's the commands and there's the state machine. The state machine is the diagram of the different states of the bytes in the system. You are the state machine. Your online identity, you actually become a divided self between your consumerist identity, which already existed back in the analog days, and now your online second self, which is a clone, which is your digital body. This is all shown very well in a Black Mirror episode called White Christmas, with the cookie clone copy of consciousness, which then runs the smart home of the future. So that's what I wanted to say. This proves even more how right Baudrillard was, that he said the self-justification, the ideology of consumerism, that it's a system of needs and their satisfaction, is not what it is. It is a semiotic system of signs, of meaning, of communication, of signification. And he also said, the advertisement seems to be selling me a specific product, but that's actually not what's going on. It's selling me the system as a whole. It's selling my allegiance to the system of advertising, the greatness of America, the greatness of this modern society of abundance, which is satisfying all my needs. The creation of an ambience and architecture of shopping malls. So it has this, and he talked about sign objects. The consumer objects and products are not physical objects, they are sign objects. So in a way, he foresaw digital and virtual long before we had the algorithmic coding. He used this term, the code, very funny, because now today we have software codes, but the code was like this total system where your socialization, your belonging in the system is constantly reaffirmed with all these semiotic messages. The code was also digital, and it was also genetic. Consumerism is the crucial productive force of capitalism. It's not just an extra sphere, so he goes beyond Marxism. And finally, last thing I'll say, consumerism is the pact with the devil. And he ends the book citing the German expressionist film, The Student of Prague, from 1913, which was remade like 3 times. you know, that's an amazing film where this student, to get in exchange for a lot of money from the devil, he signs a contract. The devil says, I'm going to give you tons of money, and what I get from you is I can choose anything in this room. The student is poor. He lives in this little room. So he laughs and says, you just want to take, I have nothing here that you would want to take. And then the devil, he has a big mirror, a full-length mirror. The devil folds up and takes his mirror image. And Baudrillard is saying, consumer culture is also narcissistic. We're self-referential. That's Americans. We lose the ability to recognize otherness, other cultures, other people. There's Donald Trump. We're absorbed in our narcissism, and we now have the cloned double with digitalization. The idea of the double, which is an exact digital copy of yourself, which is narcissism, whereas in, let's say, Dostoevsky in 19th century literature, an analog double was the shadow, the mirror image, the companion, a double who is not exactly the same as me, but who is kind of neither the same nor different, let's say. A double that is representation rather than simulation, which allows me to understand, I only exist because I'm differentiated from others.
Thank you so much, Professor Shapiro. Let me please kindly ask you just to conclude that in a minute.
Right. So he says, again, he presaged the digital and talked about the loss of the mirror image double, of the shadow double, which in the story of the student of Prague leads to his death, which is the only possible outcome of the clone digital self.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your report. And by this moment, please let me give the floor to our next speaker, Alexander Sagaidak. You're welcome. Please turn on your mic.
Благодарю. Продолжая мысль о том, что главное производство – это производство социальных отношений.
I'm going to continue to prolong my reflection upon the idea that the most major generation issue is the social generation.
Мы можем сказать, что исторически социальный прогресс проявлялся прежде всего в создании как можно более сложной иерархии социальных ролей.
We should say that the social progress manifested itself in the social role hierarchy.
Чем сложнее становилась система производства, тем сложнее становилась кадровая система.
And the more complicated the social role hierarchy became, the more complicated the human resource issue emerged.
Со временем это потребовало появления такого специфического социального института, как бюрократия.
Since times past, actually all that progress bore actually the social institution called bureaucracy.
Однако в 20 веке мы наблюдаем совершенно иной процесс.
However, in the 20th century, we're witnessing kind of different process.
Мы должны помнить о том, что, собственно говоря, общество потребления возникает как социальный проект, скажем так.
To begin with, we should definitely remember that the consumer society emerges as возникает как as a social project.
Да. И задача этого социального проекта – обеспечить для монополистического капитализма, который появился в 20 веке, получение сверхприбыли.
And the main task or the main object of this social project is to provide for capitalistic institutions the outcome, the more the better.
Получение сверхприбыли требует перманентного увеличения потребностей.
And speaking about that super profit, that is the main task of the business environment, we definitely believe that actually it is correlating with the extent of human needs.
А это, как показала история 20 века, требует массовизации общества.
And if we're speaking about the necessity or extent, judging by the history results and lessons of the 20th century, that means... Можете повторить, пожалуйста?
А это требует массовизации общества, то есть превращения общества в массу.
That means that actually we need to make the society look as a mass.
В итоге достижения предшествующих столетий по выстраиванию сложной социальной иерархии начинают стремительно размываться.
And as a matter of fact, as a result, the concurrent achievements by the previous generations, I mean the social hierarchy achievements, are getting wrecked.
И общество как социальная система постепенно теряет способность к воспроизводству.
And that also means that the society and the social system, step by step, is losing its capability for self-production.
Мы можем убедиться в этом уже хотя бы на том примере, что в обществе потребления самым престижным бизнесом является бизнес по производству потребностей, а не товаров и услуг.
And there is a bunch of examples helping us to realize the truth of this concept, since in the consumer society, the best business is all about producing the needs and necessities, but not about producing the goods or something else.
Разумеется, в первую очередь я имею в виду рекламу. Это и есть бизнес по производству потребностей.
At the very first point, I definitely mean the advertising field, because advertisement and advertising is that very thing that helps to produce the needs and necessities.
В итоге мы подходим к ситуации, когда потребности и производство уже становятся оторванными друг от друга.
And that pushes finally to the situation that the needs and the productivity or production are torn apart. They are not the part of one system.
На самом деле эта ситуация не нова. Человечество столкнулось с этой ситуацией во время знаменитой Великой депрессии.
And again, this is not an invention. This is not something new. This situation actually had occurred before, and we should, by that type of situation, we can speak about the Great Depression.
Тогда от потребностей оказалось оторвано производство товаров и услуг.
Back then, we should say, during the Great Depression, the necessities were detached from the production of goods and services.
В наше время от потребностей становится оторванным производство денег.
Nowadays, I mean, in the 21st century, the necessities are detached from the production of money.
То есть деньги уже давно, на протяжении нескольких десятилетий, из эквивалента реально произведенных товаров и услуг становятся психологическим стимулом.
For quite a long period of time, and we are witnessing the situation right now, money stopped being the equivalent of something being really produced. I mean, it's no longer not the equivalent of goods or something that humanity bore and produced. This is the equivalent. This is the psychological equivalent.
И тогда тот феномен, который зафиксировал Карл Маркс, отчуждение.
And we should definitely recall the alienation as a phenomenon that Karl Marx defined.
В наше время он приобретает уже совершенно новую природу.
And again, in the 21st century, the alienation phenomena actually is shaped differently. It's like changes its nature, its specificity.
Если 100 лет назад работник был отчужден от конечного результата своего труда,
100 years ago, the worker was alienated. He didn't have any possibility to see the results, the final results of his work.
то сейчас, как это ни парадоксально прозвучит, он становится отчужден уже от самого процесса производства.
And today we are facing kind of controversial and paradoxical situation, since the worker or the employee today is alienated from the process of production.
Естественно, что и в философии, и в психологии, да и в социологии такое состояние дел называется коротким и емким термином абсурд.
And of course, in many human branches, I mean, like in sociology and philosophy and psychology, this phenomena is called sharply just absurdity.
Ну, что касается философии и психологии абсурда, то с Олегом Викторовичем мы уже говорили на эту тему. Это очень тема перспективная и актуальная.
And speaking about the philosophy and psychology of absurdity, Drs. Sagaidak and Dr. Maltsev have already discussed and reflected upon this theme or topic, since this is pretty actual and relevant these days.
И в сущности, самой актуальной задачей сейчас и становится преодоление этого абсурда.
And the most basic task is to learn how to overcome that absurdity obstacle,
который современное общество потребления создает как некий симулятор.
And today in the consumer society, that absurdity brings the simulacrum,
заменяющий собой традиционную культуру, цивилизацию и производство.
since the simulacrum replaces the traditional culture, the traditional productivity, and the traditional society as a system.
А что касается финансовой системы, Олег Викторович, есть гипотеза, что финансовая система появилась в Древнем Вавилоне, в эпоху Нового Царства.
Moreover, there is such a hypothesis, the hypothesis of the financial system, how did it occur, how did it emerge? There is a hypothesis that it is connected with Babylonian times.
И появилась она, конечно, не от хорошей жизни, потому что тогда Вавилоном управляли ассирийские цари.
And we should say that this financial system emerged not because people were living good or they were having good times. No, this is written back to the times the Assyrians were the Tsars of Babylonia.
А всем формам хозяйствования ассирийские цари предпочитали грабеж, поэтому Вавилон грабился постоянно, регулярно и нещадно.
And to the all forms of economics, the robbery actually was that very primary activity that was distinguished. So actually Babylonian was robbed too many times.
И поэтому халдеи, которые в то время были финансовой и интеллектуальной элитой вавилонского общества,
that's why we should definitely mention the Chaldeans, since they were the members of elite of Babylonian society back those days.
они, говоря современным языком, решили сделать финансовый капитал виртуальным. И появляются первые банковские билеты, первые векселя и первые финансовые договоренности.
And these Chaldeans, they actually had come to the idea of creating the virtual, the virtual money environment or banking environment, to be more accurate in explanation. And this is the time when the first banking notes, vaxels emerged.
И этот капитал уже нельзя было ограбить, запихать в сумку и увезти за пределы Вавилона.
And speaking about notes, bills, and papers, all these capital issues, they were not the issues that someone could rob, grab, and bring somewhere else. It's like virtual environment.
Спасибо за внимание.
So that was the point. Thank you so much for your kind attention. Thank you for your speech, Professor Sagaidak. And right now, let's give the floor to our next expert, businessman, Pavel Pedina. You're welcome. Please turn on your mic.
Baudrillard не случайно издевался над потребительским обществом, называя его отсканированным большинством.
So to begin with, I feel like Baudrillard didn't kind of make fun or mock the consumer society accidentally. He didn't do that, calling them the scanned.
Отношение общества, современное отношение общества к экспертам сейчас как к шампуню Head and Shoulders.
We should say that the attitude of modern society to the expert environment is the same or identical to the attitude to shampoo Head and Shoulders.
Сегодня возникает только один вопрос: сколько?
Since today, actually, there is only one question: how much?
Сегодня эксперты обесцениваются до невозможности.
Nowadays, experts are devalued to something inexplicable, to an inexplicable extent.
Не хватает только штрих-кодов на лбу, чтобы один стоит столько-то, второй стоит столько-то.
You know, the only thing the experts are missing is like the barcode on their foreheads. Like, you know, you're walking and you see in several experts and they have the barcodes and the price labels.
Это потребительское отношение сыграет с обществом злую шутку.
However, I believe that this consumer attitude will play a cruel joke with the consumer society, with such a consumer attitude.
Потому что некоторые, поддавшись потребительскому отношению, обесценят всю отрасль.
Because again, if we have certain people who like this gameplay and they like this barcode gameplay and they feel that this is okay and nothing should be, let me say, changed, they will actually mock the shadow on the whole expert environment.
И потом экспертному сообществу будет трудно доказать, что их мнение не продается.
So if some people just play along with such a consumerism, this attitude is formed towards the entire expert environment, and then actually it would be kind of too complicated task to make the rest of the people believe that experts are real ones, but not just consumers.
Как пример, в Украине адвокат стал почтальоном.
Let me provide you a typical example. In Ukraine, the lawyer or solicitor is more playing the role of postman.
Основная его функция — разносить конверты по разным кабинетам правоохранительных органов.
Let me say that today, one of the key functions of contemporary lawyers is the function of the postman. They are bringing the envelopes with money or something like this to certain offices of law enforcement.
И это проблема не только одного экспертного сообщества, как адвокаты.
And this is just an example that it doesn't concern the lawyers only. Actually, this is the problem that is correlating the other professional fields and environments and communities as well.
Кто же породил эту идею, что все и все продаются?
So actually, who is that very person who gave up the idea, who come up to the idea that everything in this world, everything in the society could be sold and bought?
Эту идею породила западный мир, и она постепенно внедрялась в общество.
We should say that the Western capitalistic world actually is the author of that idea, and that idea was routing step by step to the rest of societies.
Сегодня возникает иллюзия, что деньги заменили интеллект, и это ужасно.
Today we're facing there is such a tendency or illusion that actually money replaced everything. And this tendency is cruel, it's disastrous.
Так никогда не было во всех периодах истории, и эта идея долго не продержится.
However, I believe that this idea was not, let me say, due to life in the previous history periods, and I definitely believe that this is not going to last too long.
На протяжении истории мы видели, что власть основывалась на знаниях и технологиях.
History teaches us that actually power is rooted on the knowledge and technology.
И наша эпоха не является исключением.
And the epoch we're living today, it's not an exclusion. It's not any different.
Лично для меня и моей деятельности наука и технологии – это очень важный элемент бизнес-конструкции.
And personally, I feel that both science and technology are, let me say, the basic elements of business of my activity, of my professional activity.
И текущая конференция есть ярким примером того,
And the conference that we are all participating right now is that very bright example,
что власть знаний и науки выше власти нуворишей или случайно заработавших олигархов и случайно заработавших капитал людей.
that the power of knowledge and the power of technology is actually cannot be compared and contrasted, since it's much of a higher level to anything that was won accidentally. I mean, the welfare, the money that were won, grabbed, or made accidentally by certain businessmen, oligarchs, and the other people.
Благодарю за внимание.
Thank you so much for your kind attention. Thank you, Pavel. So this was the second question. This was the second round. And I believe this is the high time we have finished our discussion. We have finished the third online panel. And by this moment, again, let me please thank all the speakers, all the experts, all the colleagues. Thank you for sharing your viewpoints. Thank you for sharing your perspectives. And thank you for your scientific and practical impact. Thank you so much. See you tomorrow, since tomorrow we have the fourth day of our online panel discussion of Real Life and Real Economics International Conference. And again, thanks for your kind attention. It's high time. We have finished the panel. Thank you so much. Be safe. Goodbye.
Хорошо. До свидания.
До свидания.
Всего доброго.
До свидания.
До свидания.